Okay, I'm doing this just so that I remember it myself. And also, this is for you, Joe, because I think I've never been able to explain well what I'm doing with the ego, my explanation of it, and how that ties in with Bernadette. So I'm going to do that really quick, and so that I don't forget myself, and so you can understand what I'm talking about. All right, so first there is the explanation given by Bernadette Roberts. I'm going to do this very quickly, that the animal brain is primarily sensory brain, and the senses come in, it's looking entirely out. You can see that reflected in their eyes. Now, what she says consciousness is that this is an analogy, a very accurate one. I believe she said all that was needed to create consciousness was to bend it so that now it is seeing itself. And I don't know if you could say it's seeing itself, its own experiences of the brain, or this activity actually creates self. I don't know which is the better way to see that, to say it. I have to think about that more. It's not clear to me yet. Okay, now this creates self. Now, does an animal have a sense of self? And I would argue no. They've done some very clever experiments. I thought this was absolutely charming. Whether or not an animal is aware of itself, they put a bird in front of what looked like a mirror, but was actually a computer screen. And on the screen, they projected the bird just as if it's a mirror, but they put some discoloration on it that made it look dirty or like it had something on it. Now, so the bird would look at that image and constantly try to clean this thing off of itself. So it knew that what it's seeing there is here. So that's some rudimentary sense of self. I shouldn't even say sense of self, knowledge that you are there. Now, you might be there now, what Bernadette's saying is this animal is only looking outward and that you can see it in their eyes. So now this bird might be looking into the image out there, and also it can see its own physical self to some extent. I don't mean to curve consciousness, but visually with its eyes it can see itself. And it can look down here and see whether or not it's clean. Even though that computer screen is showing it's not. And so it might just be one object. It's aware that of itself. It might not be the experiential. What I'm going to talk about it as an experiential dimension. It's not going to have that conscious dimension. It's not self-aware in the sense that a human being is, that you can see in someone's eyes that they are aware of themselves. I'm not talking about reflecting on yourself. You can look at an animal's eyes, they're totally looking out. And so it can have an image of itself. I think the animals have feelings, People who own dogs are going to swear they have feelings, and I agree with them. They have feelings. They probably have thoughts, but those are all experienced, all seen outward. They don't have an interior experience. Now, I will say one more thing about self. David Bohm gave an interesting thing. I was fortunate enough to be in a lot of very small group meetings with David Bohm and a couple of private conversations. And he gave the analogy of talk about how Piaget did this charming experiment. In the experiment, there's an open doorway, and a toddler on one side who could crawl. And the experimenter was hidden behind the other side of the wall. So the toddler couldn't see the experimenter. he could just see through this open door, and there's these two walls here. So the experimenter sitting on the other side that the toddler can't see, and then he rolls a ball across so that it goes across the open space and then behind the other wall that the toddler cannot see it. Now, at a very early age as a toddler, the toddler, to go see the ball, the toddler will come and turn in the direction from which the ball originated. See, it saw it as a phenomena. And over here was the origin of the phenomena. And Piaget pointed out that later, it's going to get an image of it's going to realize that this is a relatively permanent object. You know, won't be using the idea of relatively, which I like to use, relatively permanent object. And so when it gets a little older, it knows to turn and look for the ball there. And so there is a certain point where you have these images of these objects, and then you see yourself as one of these objects, you see. As the bird has some sense of an object sitting here, you know, there's an object in the mirror, there's an object here, you see, and it's the same object. Don't know what it thinks about that. You know, its concept of a mirror, does it have an image of a mirror? You know, obviously this phenomenon, looking at a mirror is different than looking at any other object. So anyhow, there's probably these thoughts and things going on. So anyhow, David Bohm goes on and says, so then you start gathering information and knowledge about this object yourself. Now, I'm thinking the bird has some of this. It knows there's a spot on it, you see. So David Bohm was implying this is the origin of self, you see. It's the origin of the self-concept. But I'm claiming that that's entirely different than this. This has nothing to do with the particulars of what you're thinking. The particular, if I can open this up, I'm still talking about a brain that's consciousness that's doing this. But the thoughts you're having are what's happening on the brain. This is your thinking and feeling. And even the senses come in and leave an impression that is a part of the thought and feeling process, what's going on here. And so that has nothing, see, so the question is, and this is all that psychology says, all that Western spirituality says, and even Eastern spirituality, no one has ever said what Bernadette Roberts is saying to describe the nature of the self. They are all talking about self as these self-images. Eastern religion goes a little further than Western psychology, as it says, is the very notion that there is an individual there true, you see. Western psychology obviously knows that your self-images have next to nothing to do about the truth of any self that's there, if there is one. It should be clear to them, because they know how arbitrary this whole thing is. These particular things are that you're thinking and feeling, the way you see yourself, the way you see the world. It has to do with your childhood experiences. You know, that's where they're going to go into all of this. You know, it's all about how you see yourself, and all they want you to do is have a good enough self-image to function in this world, image of yourself in the world, you know, confidence that what you are and what the world is like, that you're going to function successfully. Get your job, have your kids if you want. The only true self is one that's true to you, that you like playing the violin more than the piano, you know, or more than art, or more than gymnastics, or more than, you know, engineering, you see. So knowing what you truly like is you know, one way about it. You know, what they're calling often your true self, what you really want to do with your life, what you know, instead of what your parents or society is, you know, telling you should be doing. You know, maybe they're telling you to have kids and you don't want kids. And whatever. And so that's all. So they're only concerned about this. So I want to emphasize the extraordinary significance of saying it's a structure. A structural thing is giving rise to an experience. What Bernadette Robert does, I don't think she uses this phrase. I've never heard this phrase used before, but I made it up and I love it. It seems right on. This creates a different experiential dimension, an entirely different an experiential dimension that is entirely absent to the animal. Now, the next question is, do we have both? Do we have this conscious experience where we know ourselves, where we see ourselves? Now, this is not our deliberate reflection. Like, I can sit here and meditate and watch my thoughts and feelings and so forth. Look at how I view the world and myself, and just think. And that's different. That's reflection. That's done by choice. This is entirely beyond our choice. This is happening just like our heart is beating. It never stops. And Bernadette says there's an energy fueling that, because she has gone to the state where this ceases to function. And otherwise, I like to think of it in some ways, the analogy of a mirror is like, because the mirrors happen without any self-control. If there are two mirrors here, it's just going to happen. It's not a matter of choice. You're not choosing it. It has nothing to do with what's being reflected, which is your thoughts and feelings. Your thoughts and feelings are what's being known, both subject to object, subject to the object to, each is subject and object to the other, subject in itself and object to the other. If you use this analogy in that way, you have to be a little careful. This is not voluntary. It's going on automatic. Bernadette Robert didn't like the idea of a mirror because she said there's an energy fueling it, and that energy ceases. But I like the idea of a mirror in the sense that it's totally beyond your control, and it's happening constantly. And so now the question is, do you have this, and do you also have the senses? Do you have both? And the answer is no. And Bernadette knows this from experience because she's seen the different states. And also, I've had a little glimpse of this. And so when the senses come in, it is nonetheless they're being known this way. They're being known as consciousness. It is your conscious experience of senses. Now I want to distinguish that between the thoughts and reactions you have about what you're seeing. You may say, oh, look how beautiful it is. This tree is so lovely, and this is color green. And that tree is yellow. And wouldn't that look pretty in my garden? You have all these thoughts going on. I'm in Hawaii, and can I move here? And, you see, all of our reactions, I want to live here, I want to repeat this, these are all reactions. So now a lot of people interested in religion have come upon what you would call a silent mind, in which they are vividly aware of nature in an intimate, very intimate way, that free of all these reactions. See, that's what they're calling a silent mind. There are no reactions. But is that the animal's experience? The answer is no. This is your conscious experience. Not conscious because of activity happening on the surface, your thoughts and feelings, your reactions. It's because the senses are known through consciousness. You have this single dimension of experience, this self, this consciousness. So this is a self, so that self is fundamentally, now this is going to be important for what I'm going to talk about later. This is a function, and it is giving rise to an experiential dimension. And there's an energy involved. And that energy either ceases or the way it flows transforms. Now, I can't speak to consciousness, whether its energy is simply flowing in a different way and no longer producing this effect, or if the energy just ceases. Bernadette says it ceases, but I don't know if she, thought about whether it could be moving in some other way. That's important. Now, there has to be, if the energy is going to flow in a different way, this turns out to be important. If the energy is going to flow in a different way, there's probably some corresponding biological change taking place. Who knows what that is, But I don't think energies can flow independently of some sort of biology involved in it. Maybe it doesn't have to. But these, nonetheless, when the energies, now talk about consciousness, the energy might simply cease. And that's what she says. And but this next thing I'm going to talk about, the energies, the way they flow is going to change, and change permanently. And so now let's talk about this, why there's going to be one other structural, I'll call it structural, like I'm saying. I'm not sure if the brain's actually changing or how it's changing, but definitely the way in which the energies are capable of flowing, or even whether they exist, is going to be crucially important. And so I tend to talk about it as structural changes. If you include the way in which the energies are flowing and their behavior, you include that in structural. All right. So now, is there a problem here? Now what's happening is, because of this back and forth, this awareness of the state you're in. Now, if a bird's hungry, it goes and eats. I guess it would feel hunger, and its instincts would kick in, and it would go to eat. It'd have these instincts that drive them, a certain amount of conditioned behavior from watching your parents, what food they eat, and I think isn't migrating. I think, is that learned? I think there's some way in which it's learned, in some way it's instinctive. But as one person put it, your birds are going to migrate at a certain time, regardless of whether or not there's still food in the location it's presently in. It's still going to leave it and migrate. Something's kicking in, and so it could be learned behavior. And they say they're aware of magnetic fields. But anyhow, I shouldn't go into this too much, because there are clearly genetic dispositions and learned behavior as well. And but the thing is that becomes far more complicated when you have consciousness. Now you're aware that certain states, certain things make this experiential, what you're experiencing, more pleasurable or more painful. You see, because you have this self now, this knowing of the state you are in, whereas the birds are just looking out, and it probably sees hunger as a part of its the environmental condition, and it might even know it's hungry, but it doesn't have this experiential dimension of self. You see, it is creating an experiential dimension totally different than the experiential dimension of the animal. And so there is now consciousness, self, and then there's the desire for this to be. See, the animal wants to be satiated in a sense. It wants to eat when it's hungry. And what about a person now can have these desires that the very thought of things can produce pleasure and so forth like this. This can create problems. These people desire power, makes them feel good. A good self-image makes them feel good. And people can become dangerous in many ways. And they can just continuously seek pleasure, which makes them feel good, but it turns out it's a very superficial life. And then the question is how considerate you are to other people's experiences. You see, there's suddenly with consciousness, you have all these problems can occur. And I think there are some people, some infants are born perhaps without the next development I'm going to talk about. And then they won't have this self-control. They will have their instincts, they will have pleasure. Now, I'm not an expert on this at all, and I've just heard the bare minimum of things, so I'm kind of thinking that they're this way from what little I've read. And this may not be a condition that anyone has, so I'm kind of speculating here. But I'm pointing out something relevant nonetheless. That is, they need to be controlled from their outward environment. They need to be taught habits. The parent probably has to condition them again and again. Sit here, eat your vegetables, eat with a fork, not with your hands, you see. With their hands is easy. So the parent has to be firm, teach them a pattern. They probably use positive and negative reinforcements, which these days we try to avoid that as much as we can. We don't want to give them an electric shock if they do the wrong thing. So it's possible that without even positive and negative reinforcements, just controlling the child to develop a habit, But such a child would need continuous control until they have right habits. It's an enormous burden on a parent, you see, from what I understand, an enormous burden. But they can see something in that child, you see. See, there's one other thing here I'm not bringing in, and that is the divine, God. It's quite possible that the bird is more aware of the divine than we are, because we are adding layers on top of that. This experiential dimension might be further, in some sense, from awareness of the divine. Obviously, we're not that aware of the divine. Few people are, and aware of it ever in their life. But we don't know about the bird, you see. And there's reason to believe that they might be. And these infants, that aren't properly, don't have the full development of consciousness that we have, they may be more aware of the divine than we are, even though they have this behavior that is inappropriate, and we consider it inappropriate. They're fine with it, And if they get hurt, then they have these, this instinctive and this conditioning. They'll learn not to do it. And if something hurts. Okay, so that's a reason. So what I've been describing is the reason that this consciousness is not, having this development of consciousness creates an enormous problem. Now I'm going to tell you what the fix was. This is all designed by God. The probability of an animal evolving from this to this. If you look at, they say just 3% of our genes are different than an animal. Someone asked me when I talked about us having instincts like an animal, they asked me, do you believe in evolution? They said it in a way like, do you believe in evolution? They were a Christian and a deep one. And they were rather mystical. And they challenged on that. Now, actually, there are aspects of evolution I don't believe in. For one, it couldn't, if you know a little bit about probability theory, the probability of that 3% of them changing, turning out to have this consciousness and everything we have, is just unbelievably small. It's one out of a number so far exceeding the number of atoms in the universe to make that look like a tiny, tiny number, the number of atoms in the universe. It's the probabilities are generate enormous numbers. So anyhow, we haven't brought, so anyhow, there is this extraordinary development of consciousness that the animals don't have, an entirely new experiential dimension. and a capacity for functioning that we didn't have before. But like I've been pointing out, there's a limitation on this. Now, what is needed here is self-control. And that is actually an added structure. So we have self. What's being added and what does it produce? It produces what is being referred to as ego. If you differentiate between ego, see in the West, see when the East came to the West, the influence the East had on the West, I'm referring to as New Age. Excuse me, lumping it all into that term. New Age. The West picking up what the East has said. And one second. Okay. The East has said. Now, we're familiar with the ego. You know, I think maybe Freud, I don't know if Freud was the first one that developed that. And as separate from the superego, I think he called it. And but now that it's developing into a distinction in the West, and I don't know, you know, everything that the East has, you know, but a distinction between, well, they do have a distinction because they call the true self and the self. And I mean, if you go back 100 years, like Ramakrishna, when he talks about ego, he's talking about self, true self, you see. So there wasn't a clear distinction between the two. And but these days they're trying to distinguish. Now, when we talk about ego, we're not talking about egotistical. You know, it is being portrayed that the ego, you see, is preventing this true self. And it's being looked at in very negative terms. But I'm going to show you the distinction that needs to be made. The distinction that shows how we are actually transformed. Because people are misunderstanding what the ego is. They're misunderstanding the transformation. And they're misunderstanding how it happens. Even these great mystics, West and East, are not articulating the ego as I'm going to articulate it. I'm going to articulate it as a structure and function, just as Bernadette is articulating about the self as structure and function. The function of this back and forth reflection. Oh, she would call it reflection with an X, as opposed to reflection, CT, you know, because we can voluntarily, you know, make the decision to reflect upon ourselves. You see, we do that in meditation and in, you know, at other times. And but this reflection is happening automatically. That's creating self. So anyhow, it's a structure and function. I think that's what I was getting at. And now there's a new structure and a new function that's going to be placed on top of this consciousness. That's going to be added to consciousness, reconfigured consciousness, to create what I'm calling the ego. And this is, just as the self is not some idea, so too this ego is not an idea. It's a structural, functional phenomena. And it is producing an entirely different experiential dimension. So this ego, so what is this ego that I'm referring to? It's a structure that was developed so that we can control ourselves, so that we can see ourselves as an object and manipulate ourselves. You see, that infant that I described, or that as a child that grows up is not controlling itself. It's having adults control it, and the environment control it, you see. Not too different from the in that sense, from the animals, you see. Except it does have this self, you see, experiential dimension, which can cause, problems even in someone, configured like that. And so anyhow, this structure then is going to allow us to control ourselves, and it's going to produce a peculiar state, a peculiar capacity. That is, you can see yourself as an object. When you sit and look at your thoughts and feelings, you have this sense that you're watching them. You're having these thoughts and feelings, and you watch them. You see, I did so much meditation. If you didn't meditate a lot, you didn't meditate at all, you're not even going to know what I'm talking about when I describe this ego. You can see that it fits certain other things because it's happening all the time. Just like this consciousness is not seeking, it's not ceasing. This ego is not ceasing, except in various spiritual experiences. And some people probably could be having these experiences and not even calling them spiritual. These are rather rare, though. A lot of people never have them in their entire lives. In fact, most people don't. Well, yeah, probably not. That this function I'm presently talking about, this ego, it ceases. And but it ceases. It's more easy to cease that than the other one. Of course, it's because this is an added structure that has to cease first before consciousness could cease. If you want that. Maybe I'll talk about that later. And so this is going to allow us to control ourselves, to civilize ourselves, certain behaviors that are inappropriate. Even just you might enjoy eating a certain food. An animal is going to eat it until its biology tells them that's it. I've watched animals. I watched a cow once. Excuse this example. Go across a field, eating berries, because I was meditating by a creek. And he'd come in and eat this really delicious looking green stuff. And then go back and eat other things that were more common. And, I thought, I bet that green stuff tastes better. But it knew to stop, or it just stops and eats something different, you see. But human beings, I like ice cream. I'm not going to stop until I get sick or until I tell myself, look, that's not good for you to eat too much, And I can control my own behavior. I can, if I get angry, I tell myself, don't hit the person. I never hit people. but you see, that's how we civilize ourselves through this self-control. And it's how we're able to see ourselves. And there's all sorts of ways we control ourselves. And we adopt these attitudes towards things, these behaviors, these images of ourselves, that we like to have, and, think of ourselves in one way or the other that is pleasant. And think of the world, hopefully, as something pleasant, or think of it that's dangerous and you have to be careful, you have to be careful what you say in front of people, you can hurt their feelings or they can get angry at you and hurt your feelings, and et cetera, et cetera. You see, all of this is taking place, this self-control. This is happening through a structure in which you are divided against yourself. You are controlling yourself, you see. How is this possible? Why does this take place? See, Freud said this superego, he's only talking about what you're thinking and feeling. You see, and to say I have to be a good person. You see, he says I have to be a good person. I can't be forever feeling my. I can't be uh, uh, forever pursuing these sensual desires. Which includes sex. When he says sex, he's talking about all sensual desires. Eating food too. He's talking about all that. And he says there's this thing that tells you inside, I've got to be, I'm looking at myself, I need to be a good person, not just do good in the world, but I have to be a good person, you see, his superego. And so now he thinks this is going wrong. It was caused by trauma. Some traumatic event made you look at yourself, worried that you as a person were under threat, or lacking something in the case of a woman. And that had to be some psychological event. But I'm saying it's born out of a structural thing. It has nothing to do with your thinking of yourself. Nothing to do with wanting to have a good self-image because it makes you feel better. That does not create the ego, you see. You can have an image of yourself, you see. Even the bird has an image of itself. And the bird wants to see himself as clean. He's trying to get rid of what's on the computer screen. It's probably frustrating that he keeps cleaning himself and he keeps seeing it in the mirror, this dirty spot. And they've even succeeded I believe they succeeded in even lower life forms, still have some sense of this self-image. But not this consciousness. Is what I'm saying. Is what Bernadette Roberts is saying. And so now, how this ego is being formed is this is a structure, the way the energies are going to flow, and possibly the liberation of an additional energy. Way these energies are going to flow is going to transform. Why they are, the condition they're in the ego is that the will, and what the Hindus call prana, it's a different energy that I think people rarely ever experience, because the egoic condition doesn't change. Unless the egoic condition transforms, you're not going to see this movement of this prana. Probably. And so what they say about the prana is that the experience that it is life. It's their word for life. Now, as a Westerner, I don't like the idea of some energy containing your very essential sense of living. What I think most people would think of as spirit, this energy, this flowing energy, which is generally not flowing in most people in the egoic condition. It's bonded to thought and feeling. It's bonded to the conscious layer of thought and feeling, not just the consciousness, the conscious layer. It's not bonded to the subconscious, I wouldn't think. And but this energy is bonded to it. Never changes, this bondedness between this sense of life. And now I don't like that idea that this energy contains your sense of living, but the experience is just like that. And so there might be something deeper causing this energy to have that sense of life in it. I can't say. So anyhow, experientially, this energy, when it pulls out of your brain, as it does when the ego ends, it pulls out of the entire cycle nervous system too. It gets unbonded. It stays in the vicinity of these things. But when it is bonded to it, you see, this is why people feel they are their thoughts and feelings. Their feelings are so intimate, you see. They are their thoughts and feelings. This experiential dimension of thought and feeling, this is what most people see live in, including the senses. It's part of that experiential dimension. See, it's because this prana is bonded to the psychonervous system, and that you feel like you're living out of thought and feeling. Now, I said once that it's your most intimate experience, feeling generally. I didn't mean for everyone all the time. And Bernadette said, disagree with that rather strongly, because she, had transformations at such a young age. And it was, before she was a teenager, she was already transforming in her mid-teens. And a little earlier, maybe, early teens. So anyhow, and now most people, almost everyone can feel that it's not their deepest sense. When you're quiet, and, which you can get if you spend time meditating, and some people would naturally have this, you go out to a park and you're kind of still for a while, or just during the day you're kind of still. You may get this deeper sense that's not really feeling. A little something intimate, something silent, kind of quiet. This quiet intimacy, you see. That, so I think there is this certain depth to people that, where I wouldn't necessarily say feeling is the deepest point. But generally throughout the day, you see, we're living with this great intimacy of thought and feeling. We feel, it's because when this prana is bonded to thought and feeling, it's a different experiential dimension than when it's liberated. And they talk about liberation and spirituality. The energies actually do become liberated from this bondedness with thought and feeling. And this isn't happening all the time, as if it's bonded or unbonded. It's permanent, virtually unceasing. If you spend some time meditating, you'll find this peace, this quiet peace, and be aware of something, transcendent. So it's not just the prana that's bonded to thought and feeling, but it's the will also. The will is bonded to your thoughts and feelings. It's bonded it's because it's completely bonded, it functions completely smoothly. You aren't every time we change what we're looking at, every time we change what we're thinking, the energy of the will, don't think of, if you think of will as, whether or not it's free will, we have free will, that's, beyond me. I don't, you can lose track of what I'm saying if you start thinking of that. Think of that as the energy behind your attention, because that's where it most obvious. Of course, the will is what's moving your hands, and so forth. It's the energy, it's just a certain energy of consciousness. And it's every time you change what you're paying your attention to. So you don't feel like you're choicefully doing it. You don't have to go that far, think, well, I'm choosing to look at this, choosing to look at that. In a sense, you are, and but you're not consciously thinking about it, So the will is behind your attention, what you attend to. Now, here's the important thing about the will being bonded to that conscious layer. This is what allows you to observe yourself, to observe yourself. It's so there's going to be the thoughts and feelings you're looking at, and the sense that you're looking at it, and the impressions you get from looking at it. And of course, those impressions you have is something you're also looking at, you see. And if you're aware of that, see, one person in meditation said, who meditates a lot, said if you feel your meditations, you're watching your thoughts and feelings, well, he said, uh, 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 and you're not progressing like you think you should. It may be that you're not being aware of this observer, the sense of the observer. Now, because there is this sense that you're observing yourself, you see. This is produced by the will's bondedness with the conscious layer. The will can consciously choose to look at this or that, to look at your feelings, so that your feelings. So there's a division here. I shouldn't do this. There are these collection of thoughts. Your intention to observe yourself, for example. And your will is going to act through it. You're going to watch yourself. And you can watch yourself continuously for quite a while. Because the will gets bonded with things, and the bond is hard to break. Well, it can be. The fact that it's bonded with the conscious layer doesn't change. You can change, your behaviors and things like that, because your will can, you can change yourself. That's the whole point of it. And so now you have this intention to watch yourself, and you have this sense of watching it because you having thoughts and feelings. You chose to watch it. See, I don't want to give the same thing as I do with consciousness. I need two things. So just don't think of Bernadette's explanation of the origin of consciousness. Just trying to make two things, two different thoughts. Let's see if I put it off screen. So anyhow, you have these two different, two different collections of thoughts. One is just coming up from the subconscious. Your thoughts and feelings are just rising from the subconscious. And then you have these thoughts, which says, watch your thinking and feeling. Meditate. Be aware of what you're thinking and feeling, or be aware of this object or whatever you're choosing to be aware of. You're using meditation, you're trying to be aware of something more of God. So anyhow, this is a collection of thoughts, which says, I'm going to watch myself. And the will is in this, observing something which is a little less under conscious control. It's just coming up from the subconscious. Of course, anything coming up from the subconscious, the will is back there at the subconscious layer too. I want to say the will's not there. The will would be operating on both in a sense, you see. But this is the point of saying it's at the conscious layer, this will. This is what's producing ego. The ability of will to bond in a special way with the conscious layer, you see. See, it's probably bonded in some sense with the subconscious layer, the subconscious layer. And but that doesn't create ego. That just creates a stream of thoughts and feelings. It's this that gives you the sense of control. The ego, the will being bonded in that special way with the conscious layer. And then with that, you can have this sense of looking at that. And notice now, you have some idea of what you're going to look at. You're going to look at thoughts and feelings. Maybe a particular feeling came up and you're unhappy and you want to examine that or something, or just some habit you want to examine, watch yourself how you eat, what you eat. So they're both collections of thoughts, but the will is bonded in this one. It's always bonded in the conscious layer. Not what happens when you get drunk. I think, I think that's maybe why people get drunk, or if you're intensely watching a football game on TV or, live, you may be so caught up in it that you're not, have little awareness of this bonding between will and the conscious layer. You're just enjoying yourself. It's just all coming up, the game, your feelings, your thoughts, and you're not deliberately, you don't have the sense. Nonetheless, the will is bonded in there. You're sitting in that seat, you're watching that TV, or you're watching that football game, or something, or whatever. So this bondedness is permanent also. And but this is a collection of thoughts. See, this is thought and feeling. They're both thought and feeling. This one, it says, I'm going to watch my thoughts and feelings. That. So it has an image inside of it of what's it going to watch. And what is it watching? It's watching thoughts and feelings. These are images. Thoughts and feelings are images, you see. A form of image is, something happening. Thinking is a little more than images, but anyhow, you're seeing the results. Someone pointed out, very interesting, a psychologist says, you can't actually see yourself thinking. You know you're thinking, but you see the results of the thinking. You see the thoughts that are the results. Kind of disturbing. You assume that you can see your actual thinking. I notice when I try to remember something. Notice when you try to remember something, you can't remember that word. You're doing something. You're looking in a particular direction. Do you know how your mind is searching for that word? We have no idea. We know we're doing it. But how is it going through that mind to find that? See, we're not aware of some of these things. But anyhow, that's a different story. So you see, this is something Krishnamurti points out all the time. He makes a big deal out of this. How does he phrase it? The observer is the observed. They're both thought and feeling, he's saying. They're both thought and feeling. This has an image of what it's going to look at. Otherwise, it couldn't have turn its attention to this, you see. And then it will see something new, particular feelings that are flowing through at the moment, and it will influence this, and you feel like you're seeing it. You have your opinions about it, you see, and that might change how you're going to look at it, how you're going to conceive of it. They're both just thoughts and feelings, but the will is bonded at the conscious layer. Is there actually, this is interesting, I've just thought of this, not too long ago, a year or more ago, are there two things happening in consciousness? Actually, there isn't. Consciousness is singular, it turns out. We have this sense there is. What's actually happening is these thoughts and feelings are opening up into that singular consciousness. This is making a choice. This is thoughts and feelings. It is making a choice. The will is functioning through that to what? What is it functioning to? What is it controlling? What is going to open up in consciousness? What is open up in consciousness is always singular. It's actually not divided. But we do have a sense of a division that's caused because this has the will functioning in a specific way. Every structural change in consciousness creates a qualitatively different dimension of experience. One thing it creates is these have abstracted themselves out as the controlling entity. It does control. As, myself. It's funny. The subconscious, you almost don't feel like it. You don't control what's coming up. You almost don't feel like it. In some sense, it's yourself. It comes out. This is the you. What you feel is you. This is you. It's your experience. There's this can give, if you strongly develop the ego, this thing, you can get a sense of alienation because it's in some sense abstracting itself out of the things it's seeing. It is perceived almost as an impartial observer to all this chaos happening in the subconscious that's coming up, your thoughts and feelings that you don't wish to have, this jealousy or something, you're looking at something, this, whatever is happening in your feelings, this sorrow of some form. And this feels like it's objectively looking at it. It is also just thought and feeling, but it has this sense of this objective observer and this controlling entity. You see, there are so many people spiritual out there who think this observer is the ultimate. It's unbelievable. Sorry. But because it appears to be so free of objective, that it is purely seeing. And now this purely seeing is still seeing through consciousness. You can without a lot of activity. But people are developing this as an identity, as to what their deepest sense is awareness. Not the thing they're aware of, not all the thoughts and feelings, the observer. They're getting this idea from these great Eastern mystics who've gone through a transformation of consciousness and is well aware they're standing in a completely different place. They're standing without this egoic condition, this egoic structure and function that is the ego. They're standing without that. And then there is this awareness. You see, this it's still conscious, but without that controlling ego, without all this self-concern, because they've already lived a moral life. They've dedicated themselves to God and to being a good person. And it has transformed their conditioning, which is why that ego can start to slip away. And that's what the ego is there for, is to say, I'm going to be a good person. I'm going to be kind to others, considerate, thoughtful, do the right thing. I'm going to pursue the spiritual life. I'm not just going to constantly pursue my own pleasure and desires. You get a sense of the transcendent. You're going to see that this is truth, that it is the salvation from man's suffering, and that this transcendent is of immense beauty or meaning. I don't know the right word to use for it. And so you're going to know that it's God, and it's the salvation to mankind's problems. And you're going to pursue God. It's the ego that sees this, and your will. That's why you say, I'm going to live a religious life. I'm going to become a vegetarian. I'm a vegetarian. Now I need to eat fish. Someone asked me if I was vegetarian. I said, oh, it's from Buddhism. And the person was about to order meat, this girl. We were in a group of people, and this one young girl thought, like, oh, eat, because I said, and Buddha said that it's cruel. Something, I said something like that. And she said, and you can see her expression, I was like, oh. A moment of reflection on herself, it was kind of cute. And so I immediately had it. I said, oh, but I eat fish because I'm not a good Buddhist. And did she feel comfortable eating meat again? Anyhow, that was so funny. And so anyhow, we do what we think is morally right. That's chosen by the ego. To meditate is chosen by the ego. See this, and it feels effortlessly, because you are truly interested in what you're looking at. It can feel that way, because they talk a lot about your motive. Why are you looking at yourself? And you could think, oh, if I become a better person, you'd feel better about yourself. Yeah, I'm vegetarian. I drive a Prius. Remember they used to joke about that, and how electric car. I thought that was so funny because I did drive a Prius for a while, and I was like, I did an electric car and vegetarian. So that you can be smug about all that. So all these things, yes, they can feed what we call egotistical, and and they'll put the ego down, as that's all it is self-interest, in subtle ways, and not seeing things as they are, not seeing everything as they actually are, but the way you want it to be, the way it will make you feel better, you see. And so they're viewing the ego that way. And the funny thing is that now the will is bonded with the conscious layer, but as it does that and controls itself, and, its behavior, it civilizes itself, and, meditates, whatever, that's a part of civilizing yourself, all these things, you don't hit people, blah, blah, blah. 101 little things, you're considerate to people, and, you work hard, all these things, you see. This is all the ego's choice, because it's the right thing to do, and that's why you do it. And so this self-control, that's what the ego is allowing you to do. And but it is creating a further, it's creating its own qualitative dimension that is capable of loneliness. It's capable of it creates this sense of division. Also, people can be afraid of their inner depths, of their thoughts and feelings, you see. This ego can rush to the surface so they don't have to face these bad feelings, you see. It helps to create a schism, and because it's structural. Now, the particular things are called, it's this structural capacity. It's this bondedness, which produces a qualitative dimension. A lot of it is the prana being bonded in there, produces a qualitatively different dimension. But also even the egos, these collection feeling like they are observing. They feel like they're observing. That is a qualitative feeling coming from it, from this capacity to watch. Of course, there's only this singular awareness coming up in the conscious, but it's fluctuating. You see, there's these collection of thoughts. These collection of thoughts are ongoing, so it's not really fluctuating. And it's seeing this, there's this, what it sees has an impact on this collection of thoughts, but they're not separate like I'm showing you with my fingers. It's this singular consciousness taking place. But the will is indeed bonded just to these particular thoughts and feelings, particular thoughts. And of course, those thoughts, like I said, you know what you're going to look at. You don't want to look at your jealousy. There's things you don't want to look at, certain aspects of yourself. You don't want to look at what's terrible tragedies have happened in your life. Who wants to look at those terrible things? Life can be very hard. So this is deliberately creating an objective. See, Bernadette Robert said when this dissolves, she said it's the end of your ability to be objective. And it's a lot more than that. It's the ability to see when the egoic structure I'm talking about dissolves, this is gone. There is no collection of thoughts. There is, of course, you're still making choices, but it's coming up in a singular movement from your subconscious. It is virtually no bonding with, very little bonding. It's mostly the subconscious. The will acts in a singular way. The will becomes united. And it loses its something of its bonding with this. Various things happen. The ego gets ends bit by bit. Because I used to meditate, and when I would meditate, I'd be aware of these thoughts and feelings, and as you become aware of them, it would open up into the more subconscious, deeper things that were below that, because often what you're thinking and feeling is a response to something that's happened that has its own thoughts and feelings. Once you are in the process of being, of observing them, you are slightly distancing yourself from those thoughts and feelings. And this is a part of what this ego is able to do, is to distance itself from certain thoughts and feelings, which allows for it to function under very bad circumstances. You have this certain confidence that you'll be able to get beyond it. That's this ego allowing you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, as they say. And that's the ego doing this, you see. And what you need to do to function in this world sometimes if things are really bad, and you slowly become a little more objective, which is strengthening this, because this is a good thing. You're becoming more objective, a little more distant from your thoughts and feelings. Bernadette Roberts even suggested that once. See, Krishnamurti would have none of that when he would talk about it. At least once I heard him say that. You're not becoming objective. You're not distancing yourself or something. You're not becoming objective, he said. That's because he's in this transformed state, and in that state, you're not objective, And Bernadette said it's the end of being objective, and when this ego goes. And do you realize how extraordinary of a statement that is? That you're not able to be objective? I mean, now, I want to say, totally unobjective. But the thing is, I think what she's pointing at is this. I'm certain about it because it happened at the exact same, transformational point as it did for me. And the funny thing is that people realize this ego is good. I mean, when it's coming from, their influence from the East is telling you the ego's bad. Well, the ego's the cause of all these problems, you see. They won't say it's bad because that's a judgment. They know the judgment's part of the egos, or so they think. So they'll pretend they're not judging, and people like Krishnamurti will constantly point out negative things. Negative. We're just looking. We're not judging. But the whole reason he's pointing out all these things, he knows what trouble they are. But anyhow, so yes, at some point you're no longer objective, and because of the singular movement of the will from the subconscious into the conscious layer. And I even read recently, one thing you can't do is make an effort. It's this ego that makes an effort, where it intentionally flows the energy in a particular direction because you're going to focus. You see, that's one way. It's the ego that says, I'm going to have this intensity of focus on this task at hand, which you need to do. It's a good thing, this ego. So it's what makes an effort. And here Ramana Maharshi saying, I can no longer make an effort. And you say, well, maybe a little one, And it's true. There's some sense in which these capacities continue. And let me say what doesn't change. So, this thing happened in stages. And I don't know if I want to go right now. I'm trying to do a quick version. It's already been an hour, for crying out loud, over an hour. It went down, like I said, started to say, the subconscious, if you watch and this is very important in meditation, if you're watching your thoughts and feelings, just watch the surface. If you watch open up to the surface, then the subconscious can come up, you see. And for me, it would do that. It would open up. And then if you face those thoughts and feelings, the only reason they're going on and on is because you're not facing them. It's because you're trying to move away from them. Once you open up to it, then they tend to drop away because you were You were, well, anyhow, it was because you're resisting that was going on and on. You know, you don't want someone says something you don't like about yourself and you can't let go of it. But if you totally open up to the feeling, you know, saying maybe he's right, and then feeling such and such a way about it, then you can move on. And you will consciously move on. So anyhow, that very capacity opened up the surface to the depths. Went away separately. One of the first things that went away. When I meditate, I could no longer open up that, and it was used to be my opening into silence, and from that silence to see the transcendent. You see, and to see God. So it would never open up. So what would happen is thoughts and feelings would just flow. It's just this, flowing, flowing, flowing. And then later, at a different point, you can't watch it. First, you can't open them up. And Bernadette also talked about this, you know, at that stage where your thoughts are just flowing incessantly. She would say, it has no object at which to focus on. And so it would just ramble and ramble. No object, you see. It had no controlling agent. So anyhow, then that disappears. And then when the prana is liberated, it's a totally, you're changing the structure and the way the energies are moving. They're no longer bonded. Then the prana gets opened up out of your chakras. And then it reaches this depth of peace and being, you know, eventually when all the chakras are opened up. You live in a experientially different state. Now, I might, gosh, I guess I'm making a whole video out of this. I got so much more to say. But I'll stop here. What I wanted to do was, let's see, what was it that I was thinking that I hadn't thought of it that way before? Anyhow, maybe it's just this general line of presenting it this way. But consciousness is a structure and function. The ego is similarly a structure and a function, like this. Both of them produce a qualitatively different dimension of experience. And I'll just stop there for now. Or should I just finish this? Say some more. I'll say one thing that I think is kind of interesting. This is why other mystics aren't talking about the ego in the way I am. No one else has talked in the way Bernadette, talking about its structure and function. I wonder if that helped me see the other as structure and function. I don't think so, because it was being demanded. It was being undone before I met Bernadette Roberts. This egoic structure. And but anyhow, so it's not just what you're thinking and feeling. See, this is where people are egotistical, self-concerned. It's all this sort of thing happening here. Of course, this is self-concerned too. I mean, this is egoic structure. In fact, when you can't observe yourself, do you know what a release that is? You are no longer a problem to yourself. You still are aware of yourself and realize that, you know, you could improve this and that, so forth. But when you cannot get engaged with yourself in that way, when your will is singular, because you've lived a good life, you've developed good habits, that's why this is here. To choose the right path to develop, to civilize yourself, to become a good person, you know, to pursue spirituality, And people in the ego, they think, you see it all the time, they're not aware of it. They're thinking that they are going to get mastery of themselves. This extraordinary mastery. And the exact opposite happens. Because that one that is mastering yourself, that's why it's there. You want to master yourself in some sense, you know. You don't want to be like a dictator. You know, there are people who control themselves just like an intolerant dictator. You know, you don't want to do that. What do you call not a dictator? But anyhow, you don't want to go too far in that. And some people think they're going to have a clean, good one, self-control, being able to control this and that. And they don't talk about it as control, but you can see they're trying to make this as if this can become perfect. And it can do extraordinary things. It can be so aware of this that your whole mind goes silent because you face the whole process of your feelings. And there's nothing moving, no reason for it to move, because there's nothing concealed there any longer, you see. So this is able to bring you to a silence and to see the transcendent. This is a perfectly good thing, you know, and to be a good person, you know, to sit in silence, you know, and to have that intimate contact with yourself and God. And so this is perfectly good. But the funny thing is, this actually dissolves into this. Your will becomes sigma. There's no longer that controlling agent, you know. And then there's this sense of oneness. This sense of oneness that is more than just this sense within yourself of being one. You'll be one within yourself. And it turns out you can be one with nature in a way you never could have imagined before the transformation takes place. Because of the permanency of that, well, you can have a mystical experience or two. People that will have one or two and it change their whole life. They'll spend the rest of their life pursuing religion because of an experience they've had. And, but they have, you know, except for a few experiences, they, anyhow, all right. So, oh, there's one other thing I thought I'd mention because it's so curious. And why so many, I think, great mystics haven't seen this, haven't described it in this way. Is that I like the analogy of a fish in water. They say, I think the old Chinese saying is don't ask a fish about the water, about what water is. And they have a similar saying in the West, I think, yeah, something the same thing, you know. That is because they are born in it. They live in it. They've never seen life without it. They haven't, and I'll tell you about these qualitative dimensions, this qualitative dimension of the ego. And when the ego is there, you probably slipped into that when you're about 3 years old. There is a certain time when that development takes place biologically. And I'm totally guessing on the age, might be earlier. And you can see that in their eyes, a sudden change in their eyes. Almost, I saw it in my son, this sudden naughtiness. When he realized he has some power, you know? And as power, because I think it's the power going to that conscious agent. And so anyhow, so anyhow, so the fish hasn't abstracted out, as if the fish is thinking about it, this qualitative thing, because it's never been any different, you know? How would you abstract that out and say, you know, talk about the water? I think I think people didn't know what, now we describe wind as these molecules, flying past you and you feel that. What do people think wind was before that? You know, uh, you know, wind was this phenomena, you know, and of course sometimes it's not windy, so they had to abstract out this sense of wind. But uh, um, uh, but but this fish in the water, you see, that's what that saying is about. It's saying, look, it doesn't know the water. Isn't a worm. Now imagine this. This is what happened to the transformation. Imagine the fish jumps out of the water into the air for a moment. This is what happens in just similar experiences. You know there was something extraordinary, and that's it. But you don't really know much. It's when because that's not, these experiences are not transformations. When the transformation takes place, you jumped out of the water. Now, do you know what the water was? See, this is the funny thing. You don't. When you jump out of that water, you're in a different experiential dimension. You have never abstracted out what water is. You are incapable at this time, because these are structural changes, permanent structural changes, giving qualitatively different entire dimension of experience is going to change. It's going to change very subtly. In fact, your thoughts and feelings are not what changes, and this is what everyone expects. This is what everyone, so many people in the New Age movement and in the West who are repeating these Eastern things, thinks it's a change in perspective. Your perspective is all happening here. How you see the world, how you see yourself, whether you think there's a self there at all. That's just happening on your thoughts, and the way you see the world is affected by how you see it, how you believe it to be, and so forth. And there might be evidence to support some of these things like that, but these evidence is merely giving rise to a different perspective. So many people thinking they're enlightened because they adopted this different perspective and think it's nothing different but a different perspective. And that's partly because the East and other mystics can't explain it well enough. So anyhow, we want a better explanation. The ego is not what's happening in your thoughts. It's not an idea. Even the self is not an idea. These are, in fact, the extraordinary thing about them is this entirely, not only do they have these functions that would be, these incapable without it, because these are the functioning. Consciousness is this functioning. The ego is this capacity, you see. It's producing an ability to function in a totally unique way to civilize yourself, this important stuff, you see. And consciousness, oh my goodness, a whole different dimension of self-knowing, of the whole creation of self. It's an extraordinary thing, you see. But anyhow, it's not just what's your perspective. And the amazing thing is this qualitatively different experience, as well as the different functioning. So the fish jumps out. It can't experience that. It can remember certain things. It can remember that it had suffering, but it can't recreate the same. There's still some forms of suffering, it transforms somehow. When the ego is gone, there is still suffering, but it's so easily gone beyond, so completely gone beyond into things. So anyhow, the fish out of the water doesn't really know what that other state was, the qualitatively different dimension. And I think that's why they don't talk like that. That is a qualitatively different dimension. They they tend to describe their thoughts and feelings, because their thoughts and feelings actually haven't changed. You do have a different perspective, but so many of your thoughts and feelings will be changed it doesn't instantly change these patterns. Oh, there is one, when you're self-concerned, there is a huge collection of thoughts and feelings concerned about that. When this goes down, this one goes down, merges with this, you become one. Your will becomes one. Your subconscious doesn't totally come up. It's not that. It's not a oneness between your subconscious and your conscious. The only one is not because you become aware of everything in your subconscious mind. That's not the direction to go. I mean, that's useful only to a limited extent. And it's not going to be the fruition of this, is that you can know everything in your subconscious. What's going to happen is the will is going to move in a singular way from the subconscious into the consciousness without this division. And there's going to be an experience of oneness, like I said, a totally different, qualitatively different experience. So anyhow, the fish out of the water doesn't know what happened, doesn't even know what it was, very limited knowledge. And this is the position of the mystics. And Krishnamurti can't at all describe what's happened. He went through what the kind of traditional, what most people go through, dark night of the soul. He had two parts to it, like most people have. And then this union, I'm one with the beloved. And then he talks about being further, he had complete enlightenment, he said, I think it was in his 40s or 50s. And he had the awakening of the Kundalini, the balancing of the chakras. He said both these, but he won't talk about it. Tries to hide all that. This is the whole human transformation of consciousness. And there's a lot you go through. And there's a lot of good things that can be pointed out as you go through it. And in that sense, there's a path. Because there's this series of transformations. So anyhow, how does the fish know about the water? Does it ever learn? They don't. They're in a different dimension. You have enough memory that you can be compassionate toward people. But when you're singular like this, it just pops up in the subconscious. You can say things sometimes that you regret later. Like, oops. Because you're not self-editing yourself anymore. You can't edit yourself if you can't watch yourself. And they'll talk about everything coming up spontaneous. I know Nisargadatta will say, do you control what you're thinking and feeling? In your ego, of course you can. How would someone say you can't control what you're thinking and feeling? It's because he doesn't control it. That's that singularity of the will. They'll talk about everything's just spontaneous. So, I don't plan what I'm going to say. It's all spontaneous. It is. It's spontaneous for them. I can think about elephants if I want to. They might be right even about people in the ego, about your ability to control your thoughts. Like I said, we know the product of our thoughts, not our thinking. Someone has said, we know anyhow. All right, so how does the fish know about that? Because as Bernadette Robert said, these transformations are permanent. Now, I think I went back and forth. I know I went back and forth. I think it was a grace from God because I wanted to know these things. And I think it was so that I understand what the ego actually is. And so when this big transformation took, kind of finished up, I realized right after it transformed, the prana had pulled out, I realized I could gather my energies and push myself back into that state, push those energies back in that direction, make them flow that way. And when I did, it it felt rather twisted. It felt bad. And I had a bad impression of the ego because of that. But it's because I pushed myself. And if this is how you make an effort. If you try to make an effort after the transformed state, I tell you, it would damage my brain. It would, in just a few seconds, it could take a day or more to recover from the damage that could be done in trying to use effort. So anyhow, so I had a rather bad impression. And I think God deliberately brought me back a second time. So I'd have a good view of the ego. And so it was so funny the way it came back. It was as if myself was at a distance from me. And it is a distinct bundle of thought and feeling that are involved in this self-observation. That's the only thing I know that drops away, which is a huge thing that drops away. As far as your conditioning, once that goes down, how can you bring those thoughts back if there's nothing to look at? I mean, functionally, it's not possible to see yourself like that anymore. And so anyhow, these thoughts and feelings came back as if from dim. It's so funny. It reminds me of Krishnamurti when he transformed in this way. He said, I went out into the hills looking for myself. I don't think people must be clueless about what I think when I read it, I was quirky little thing. God, like, what are you talking about? Going out into the hills to look for yourself. I mean, there's ways you can think of that. You can imagine this, but I think that he's talking about that, He's after having just transformed, you see. It's just a curious thing. So anyhow, it came back, and when it did, I was in that egoic state again. And it was interesting because the egoic state has an energy to it. This energy is going in a particular way. It had this energy, this positive energy, this confidence in your ability to deal with this world. And it's just this energy felt good. It's like this positive energy and this optimism, this it was a rather good state. Now, I can imagine so anyhow, it lasted almost a day. And the interesting thing is, I went to sleep, and when I woke up, it was no longer there. And these transformations never happen when you're asleep. But I think it's because this was just a momentary thing that came over me, and it just, I think God didn't want me to see the ego in a bad state. But now, I even hate to talk like this. Every state you're in now, there's something beyond it, is going to be extraordinary in comparison. So if I say anything bad about it, it's just coming from, the ego is not bad in itself, like I've been saying, and the state is only as bad as you see it, as you experience it. And people don't experience it as that bad. There are some qualities it produces that, certainly aren't good. A lot of things that aren't good, but a lot of things that are good. And anyhow, so, but about 20 years after that ego had dissolved, someone was depressed, a relative of mine, a distant relative of mine. And I wanted to know what they were experiencing. What is that? Because I had been depressed in my late teens just for a couple hours every evening for about a year. I think that precedes the dark night of the soul. And you'll have periods of depression. Some people do. And I knew it was a terrible thing. And but now I was no longer even capable of that. And so I wanted to know what he was feeling, what actually, I really wanted to know. And So it was out of compassion, you see. And I was asking. And like they say, if you ask God for something, he'll give it to you, if it's good for you. So I started to move back toward that egoic state. And now this is 20 years after living in this other dimension of consciousness. And this other state was the most terrifying thing I could ever conceive of. I can't think of anything on life anything that could happen that's more terrifying than that. Living that egoic condition compared to this. I hate to say that. People live in egoic. I know the state I'm in now is going to look. Bernadette Robert said, even going back into the senses from that state in God is god awful. It's so awful. A human being can't take it. God makes that journey back into the senses. She didn't even come back into consciousness. So, and I'm just talking about, journey back into consciousness would be even more horrendous. Now, I've seen going back and forth between in and out of consciousness all at once. And, but these temporary experiences are different than these permanent transformations. So I'm going to describe this ego, and it's going to sound terrible. And I don't know if I should. But it's the difference between a transformation and an experience. People have these marvelous experiences, these spiritual experiences. They come back and they say how beautiful, extraordinary it is. And life in comparison can look, like, oh my goodness, this life in comparison to that life. It can look like a lot. I'm talking about something totally different than that. That's the difference between a transformation and an experience. You have a totally different consciousness, a qualitatively different dimension of experience. And when you go back to the other, it's as if the difference between a three-dimensional world and a two-dimensional. Every direction you're looking is in that two dimensions. The only thing that's not is faith and certain forms of, love. And some things cross that two-dimensional barrier. God crosses it all the time for you, and your sense of the divine crosses that. But otherwise, your life isn't two. It's worse than that. And you're stuck. Every movement. This is what they say about the ego. You see, everything you're doing is the ego. It's ego, ego, ego. Everything you're doing is two-dimensional. And if it wasn't for the grace of God, you would stay there. But God set the ego up so it could be transformed. God created this prana so that it could both be bonded and liberated. The fact that this energy can be bonded was an extraordinary creation from God. That can have that sense of life, living in this consciousness with thought and feeling as intimate, the most intimate. Generally, besides certain spiritual things. And your intimacy can slip into something deeper than feeling, even that peace is more intimate. Being, but I don't think people who are talking about being really have had that being that the Hindus talk about. So anyhow, but it's like not just two-dimensional, but like a cartoon in comparison. I hate to say it. Sort of living out of it like that. So these transformations are permanent and bring you into a totally different qualitative dimension of experience. The thought and feeling is still the same, but they rest differently. It's really hard. It's the difference of living out of them or living with it it's just that you're deeper than that. And the chakras open up and you open up out into the divine the transcendent. Uh, um, so, so anyhow, the ego's no worse than you experience it. And it's a good thing. It's there for a reason. And eventually you'll end up in paradise anyhow. Okay, so I think that's everything I wanted to say. All right. Oh, let's see. Oh, yes, the fish in the water. It's not, the fish has to jump out. Still, it doesn't know what that salt is. It has to be dipped back in. It really won't know what that was unless it's dipped back in. It'll have some memory, but what it doesn't have is extraordinary. This intimacy of feeling. What all the movies are made about. All this psychological tension and love. That's so much a part of the ego. Bernadette said when you're in the true self, you actually can love even more. You can still fall in love, and it's true. But it's different. It's like they say, when you're in love in the ego, your heart can be broken. You're in the no ego state. Your heart's already totally open. It doesn't actually get broken. It can't. How can it get broken if it's already open? And so it's the whole experience is different, and you can more fully love in a very human way, as well as in a more divine way. So, all right, okay.